So let's talk about this paper. So just pull out the paper, Peer Effects with Random Assignment Results from Dartmouth Roommates. And can I get a volunteer to read the abstract? Read the title and then the abstract.
Peer Effects with Random Assignment Results for Dartmouth Roommates. The abstract. This paper uses a unique data set to measure peer effects among college-age roommates. Freshman year roommates and dorm mates are randomly assigned at Dartmouth College. I find that in this group, peer effects are very important in determining levels of academic effort and in decisions to join social groups such as fraternities. Residential peer effects are markedly absent in other major life decisions such as choice of college major. Several forms of peer effects are considered. The data support a model in which peer effects are driven by roommate behavior after the freshmen arrive. Social learning based on roommates' observable pre-Dartmouth information or skills appears to be less important. Peer effects in GPA occur at the individual room level, whereas peer effects in fraternity membership occur both at room level and the entire dorm. I also find that a freshman with high social ability is likely to remain with his or her roommates in sophomore year, but high academic ability actually decreases roommate retention.
Thank you very much. So whenever you read a paper, the first thing you're going to do is read the title and read the abstract. A well-written abstract like this will tell you exactly what the paper is about and what the main findings of the paper are. So the paper claims that this is a unique data set. What is unique about this data set?
It's random.
Say it again. What did you say? You said.
I said it. It's random.
It's random. And why is that important?
Because, like in many other college settings, they're chosen, and you can't. There's like too much, like other factors involved. Whereas like when it's random, they know that it.
Exactly, because what's happening is, so remember, whenever we look at these regressions, we're looking at outcome of person I regressed on characteristics of the group, in addition to the person's peers' actions, plus like these other contemporaneous effects, right? And then there's this error term that's also going to explain their behaviors. Now, if we're trying to figure out what's the effect of this person's roommate on them, but then there's like non-random selection, and we don't observe that, then in a sense we can't account for that, and our results can be biased. So that's the thing that's unique. Okay, good. What are the main results? What are the main results of the study?
Individuals' roommates affect their peers' GPA on an individual basis, but not really on a dorm basis.
That's right. And is the pair, and there's also a channel, is the pair effect driven by the roommate's characteristics before college or the things that happen during college? During college. Exactly. So that's important too, right? And the other thing that's really interesting too is if you look at the peer effects affect the GPA, and they also affect fraternity membership, but they don't seem to affect things like college majors. So that's also very interesting too. So when you look at these sorts of things, so this is something that you call like heterogeneity of results, right? So it's not that the peer effects are affecting every decision, but there's certain decisions that they're going to be affecting. The other thing too that's interesting too is this issue of like roommate retention at the end of this. So what they find is that if you're more social, you're more likely to keep your roommates. If you're more like academically minded, you're less likely to keep your roommate going forward. And that's kind of fascinating too, because in a sense, like, although the assignment to a roommate is random, so like whether you get somebody that's like super smart or super social, that's random. However, your decision to continue with that person is endogenous, right? So the random assignment means that who you get assigned to is exogenous, but then your decision to continue on with that person is endogenous. So in a sense, we can then look at, well, what's the effect of being assigned randomly a person has high ability on your decision to continue to associate with this person too. And so looking at freshmen is especially important because that's when the random assignment begins. Okay, So I kind of stayed there for a long time because if you have a very good paper, like somebody should be able to read the abstract and know exactly what the headlines are in the paper. And then everything else is really like the details. And so you should always read the abstract first. We're going to proceed through this paper like almost like page by page. Like there'll be some pages that we'll skip because it's a bit redundant. But I want to give you a sense too of how a really well-written paper also constructs the argument too. So let's turn over to the next page and look at introduction. So here, like, the author makes this comment about most models in economics. And what's something that's typical of most models in economics? Like, how do we assume that individuals make decisions based on what?
They're rational.
They're rational. They make decisions based on what?
They want to maximize their utility.
Exactly. They want to maximize their own utility. And oftentimes these models don't have a role for the influence on decisions of other agents too, right? This is our standard model. This is my budget constraint. These are my preferences. How do I optimize, right? Okay, good. But in principle, we know that social interactions affect our decisions, right? Like who you're going to vote for in the election might be affected by who your parents are voting for, or the kinds of conversations that you've had around the dinner table, right? Okay, good. So let's go into the second page. So now, what's the typical approach that's used when trying to estimate these peer effects, right? Like what's the typical setup that we use, the typical empirical setup that we use for getting up peer effects? We covered in class yesterday. It's discussed on the second page here.
It's GPAs, right?
Okay, so you have some outcome, and then those outcome you regress it on what?
Their test scores coming in, as well as a bunch of different things like criminal behavior, drug use, church attendance, other factors.
So at a very high level, you take an individual's like outcomes or behaviors and you regress it on the outcomes or behaviors of their peers.
Yeah.
But there are a couple of issues with this that are raised on the second page. So one is this issue of self-selection. People choose which groups they're a part of, right? And in the context of roommates, like if the assignment were not random, then they'd be choosing which people they want to room with. And so it's not the case, you don't know whether I'm doing better because my roommate is smart, or I chose a smart roommate. I endogenously chose a smart roommate because I wanted somebody that I would study with. So the direction of causality may not be clear there, right? Okay. And then the other component too is that the differences in outcomes could be caused by the differences in the backgrounds as well too. Okay. Now, if we go over to page 4, so some of the things that have been done in this literature to address these issues. So like you have this, we have this endogenating concern where the peers' actions could be correlated with unobservable ability. What's like a way of trying to solve that? Okay, using what?
Their income to use their SAT scores. That's how you can measure for like the unobservability.
So you can measure for that, right? Right, so you can use for the unobservability, and then also too for their actual behavior, like GPA, you can use like for the GPA of their peers, you can use like the family background and information of the peers as an instrument for the GPAs as well too, right? So that's something that can be done. All right. Okay. So what are on page 5? There's a discussion of what are the ways in which peer effects could drive outcomes, like during the assignment. What are the 2 ways that peer effects can change like your decisions? Kind of mentioned on page 5.
Share like different skill sets that they have with each other.
That's right. So this is the information gathering hypothesis, right? And what's the other one? The the agglomeration externality. So if my roommate joins a fraternity, what can happen is the benefits that I get from joining a fraternity are higher, because now all of a sudden I can live with somebody that's also in my fraternity. And so it's like it either lowers the cost of joining the fraternity, or it increases the benefit of being there. So there are these two mechanisms. I can directly learn the decisions of my peers, or somehow their decisions me joining that same group or participating in that same activity, lower cost or higher benefit. All right. Okay. Okay. So on page 6, one of the things that's interesting here is, so on this title, applications to peer effects more broadly. So here the authors are taking this sample and like, this is an experiment at which university? Dartmouth. And what do we know about Dartmouth? Yeah, like what kind of university is Dartmouth?
Top of the top.
Yeah, it's an Ivy League school, it's a top school. So like, if we see some results here for Dartmouth, then the question is, how do these generalize to the other population? Well, Dartmouth is a very unique place, because even if you try to say, well, okay, we found this study in Dartmouth, and we're gonna think that some of these results should hold for South Carolina State, or should hold for even for MIT, which is a technical school, like it's just a fundamentally different school. So there might be some limit in terms of the generalizability. Or if we said, well, what if we said, oh, we found these really interesting results on peer effects with Dartmouth, and we want to apply them to like the high school, like the context of the high school in Cleveland. What would be the limitation of that?
There's a much more broad range of ability in high school. Dartmouth, yeah, there might be a little bit of range, but everyone's technically still kind of on the same scale.
Right, so there's much more, there's very likely to be like a broader range of ability. What's like a second thing that's different between high schools and colleges? In general. Right, you live at home in high school, right? Whereas in college, you're like living with roommates. So like just in terms of the whole like structure of the arrangement and like the mechanisms which the peer effects can permeate, like the peer effects aren't going to be coming through like with roommates, right? It's going to be coming in high school more through in class interaction, maybe like the extracurricular interaction. So like it may be the case that the Dartmouth study does not have as much to say about these other contexts, or at least if we're trying to say, well, okay, how does the Dartmouth study inform the way that we think about peer effects more generally, we have to do it with some caveats that this is a unique setting. And so whenever you do research, you always want to do research that's going to have like broad applicability, but then you want to be aware of the limitations of generalizing that research. Okay, so this is good. So now let's talk about the empirical framework. So let's look to page 7. Let me write this on the board. And we saw something like this before. So we're going to consider, this is the model. So we have two roommates. And then we have the GPA of roommate I is going to be equal to some level constant like delta plus alpha ACA. And this is going to be like the ability, like some background measurability. Plus beta ACAJ. And this is like the roommate's ability. Plus gamma GPA J. And this is the roommate's GPA. Right? And we can write the same thing for GPA of roommate for the person J, right? Just replace I with J in equation 1. Okay, so this is all in the paper on page 7, right? Okay. Now, so we want to figure out what's the effect of the GPA of your roommate on your own GPA. What's the challenge with this? So even though we have random assignment, what's the challenge that we face about GPAs? About thinking about how does my roommate's GPA affect my GPA? What's the challenge?
On how like they stay up, they switch over your schedule.
Something simpler than that. So if I say that, let's say you and Arturo are roommates, and we say that your GPA is going to affect Arturo's GPA, and Arturo's GPA is going to affect your GPA. the challenge there is that both of those two things are being determined simultaneously, right? And so we can't say that your GPA is affecting his GPA, but then his GPA is affecting your GPA too. So you have the simultaneity issue that we have to deal with. And so both of them are endogenous, right? And so we have to figure that out. And the strategy that the authors use is really clever. So remember from game theory when we had like two firms trying to choose quantity, and they were doing it simultaneously. We generated their best response functions, and we had this notion of like a Nash equilibrium where each firm is best responding to the other firm. And so they did something similar here too, where they said, okay, your roommate's GPA is a function of your GPA, so we can just take your roommate's GPA and plug it into this equation here, and then now we get your GPA as a function of your GPA and other stuff, because your GPA is going to be affecting your roommate's GPA. Is everybody with me so far? And then you can go and you can solve this all out to get what your GPA is as a function of your ability, your roommate's ability, and so on and so forth. And so this model helps the authors to get around this issue of the simultaneity of the two pair effects. And this is the typical issue of pair effects, right? Is that if your roommate's behavior is affecting your behavior, then your behavior is also affecting your roommate's behavior, and both of those are being determined jointly at the same time. So this is the strategy that they use to get around that difficulty. And so what they can then show is, if you look at equation 4 on page 7, this gives us like the final, so we first start out with equation 1 and 2, which you can think about in this context as kind of like these like best response functions of my GPA as a function of my roommate's GPA, right? And then we can solve for the Nash equilibrium here, and we can get equation 4, where we get your GPA as a function of your ability and your roommate's ability in these error terms. Any questions on that before we move on? Okay. And the basic point over the next 2 pages is that what you can then do is, when you run this regression, we can make some further assumptions, and then we can get around the simultaneity issue by writing down this model and actually solving the model with these two things happening simultaneously. Because if we just ran that naive regression there, then we would be ignoring the fact that your GPA is going to have a direct effect on your roommate's GPA. Okay. Any questions on that before we move on? All right, let's go over to page 9. Okay. So the other thing that they consider is the following. They say, well, what if your outcomes don't depend on your roommate's background? So like, what if we assume only like contextual effects of your roommate's background? And the only thing that matters is your ability and your roommate's GPA, right? And if we assume those two things away, then what we can do is we can then say that your roommates, so there were 2 ways to deal with the simultaneity, right? Like, one was to do this kind of a situation where we thought of this like best response like setup. The other thing we could do is we can assume that your roommate's like ability/background doesn't directly affect your GPA. The only thing that matters is your roommate's GPA and like how hard they work, right? And what they do there. In that case, your roommate's GPA is still going to be determined simultaneously with your GPA. So we still have the simultaneity problem. But what we can now do is we can take your roommate's background and use this as an instrument for your roommate's GPA. Because your roommate's background is going to affect your roommate's GPA directly, but not through the peer effect. Because the issue that we had with this setup is that both of these things are happening simultaneously. So if we know what your roommate's SAT scores were and your roommate's like parental income and all these other things, in a sense we can get an exogenous measure of like prediction of what your roommate's GPA would be. That's separate and apart from the direct effect of your GPA and your roommate's GPA. Does that make sense? Are there any questions on that? Okay. So that's the second thing that they're going to do, is they're going to assume that your roommate's like SAT scores or ability don't affect your GPA, but your roommate's GPA is going to affect your GPA, and then use your roommate's ability to instrument for your roommate's GPA, so that we don't get this like simultaneity issue or this reflection problem. Okay. So that's the empirical model. So that's good. Now, coming over to page 10. So effectively, they just describe the data, and in table 1 you get a description of the data. The other thing that they talk about is, so the roommate process is randomly assigned. Now there is one caveat. So within gender, it's randomly assigned. So like essentially what they do is there are 5 different questions on this roommate survey, and they block all of the people into like people who had the same responses to the questions. And there are 32 different possible ways that you could respond to this roommate survey. And then they take each pile, and within each pile, they like randomly assign roommates. So given that you're female, you're randomly assigned, right? But you will never see like a woman and a guy being in the same room. So that's the one thing. So once we control for like your responses to these surveys, there's random assignment. Okay, so that's the main thing there. Okay, so we can see, let's look at table 1. So table 1 basically shows us what all the variables are. Whenever you do like a research paper, you want to say, well, okay, this is the data. You want to give people a sense of the data because they can tell you exactly what's happening. So what we can see is like GPA is increasing from freshman year to junior year. We can also see like what's the average like class rank. We can see what's the average response to the surveys, et cetera, et cetera. That's just so that folks know exactly what you're doing in terms of the data you're working with. Okay, good. Let's look at table 2. So table 2 is what's going to tell us, so we're on page 15 now. So when we look at table 2, in table 2, what they do is they run a regression of your SAT on your roommate's SAT, and then they control for your responses to the survey and also your responses to the gender. Remember that we said that the roommate assignment was random, conditional on, or like once we accounted for your responses to the survey. So in that case, there should be no relationship between your roommate's SAT score and your SAT score, because it's random. It's not that the kids with the really high SAT scores get bunched together, or like a high SAT score and a low SAT score person get paired together on purpose. And if you look at column 1 of table 2, it's that regression of your own math SAT scores on your roommate's math SAT scores, and then controls for how you answer these questions. And if you look at the coefficient on roommate SAT math, does everybody see that? So this is table 1, this first line here. Everybody with me so far? Is this not too boring? Is it okay? All right. So you see this coefficient of minus 0.017, and in the parentheses below it is the t statistic. So the t statistic is how many standard deviations is that away from the mean, right? And so this t statistic here is less than 1.96. So this is not significant. And so what this is saying is that there is no relationship between your roommate's SAT score and your SAT score. So we're not putting all the smart people together or all the slow people together. Because if we were putting all the smart people together, then it may not be that your GPA is affecting, your roommate's GPA is affecting your GPA. It could just be that your roommate is just an inherently smart person, even if they're lazy, right? Okay, everybody clear on that so far? Okay, good. All right, great. We're making good progress. Okay, so now let's go to table 3. This is where the main results are. We'll spend most of our time here. So in table 3, what they do is they run this regression of, they just run this regression here, not taking into account the simultaneity. They just say, let's just run this regression, see what's the relationship between your roommate's GPA. And so let's look at, so this is table 3A on page 30. Let's look at the first column. So who can tell me, like, what's the result of, what's the effect of your roommate's GPA and your GPA? Describe that result.
So is it like a 1 point increase in roommate GPA is associated with a 0.11 increase in your average GPA?
Exactly. So if your roommate goes from having if you go, the difference between somebody who has a roommate that has a GPA of 3.0 to a 4.0 is like a tenth of a GPA point. It's like just being randomly assigned to like a person who's smarter by 1 GPA point is going to increase your GPA by a tenth of a point. That's effectively what it's saying. Now, underneath this 0.1 is the T statistic, which is 4, so that's going to be positive and significant. Does that make sense? Okay. Who can tell me what's the effect of your roommate being a sorority or fraternity, in a sorority or fraternity? What's the effect of that on your probability of being in a fraternity or sorority?
8% more likely to be in a fraternity or sorority if you're reading.
Exactly. You're 8% more likely. That's good. Is that significant?
Yes.
And why is that significant?
Because the T statistics rated on the
Yep. Who can tell me about the probability that you graduate late if your roommate graduates late? Who can interpret that? Don't be shy, guys.
It's only 1% and it's not significant.
That's right. 1% is not significant, exactly. What about if your roommate's a varsity athlete? What effect does that have on you becoming a varsity athlete? None. Does that make sense? Yeah, because varsity athletes are like recruited. It's not like you're like, oh, my roommate's a varsity athlete. I'm going to randomly decide to be a varsity athlete too. Okay, great. What about the fact of your roommate being an economics major? How does that affect your decision to be an economics major?
Decreases your chances by 7.8%.
Right. Is it significant?
No.
But it's like
It's
marginal,
close.
right? It's close, exactly. What about your roommate being a social science major?
You know, statistically significant or different from you.
That's exactly right. And so to summarize these results, what we see is that there are peer effects on your GPA. So higher roommate GPA leads to higher uniform GPA. Higher roommate participation in fraternity sorority leads to higher participation in sorority for you on average. Doesn't affect your graduation rate. Doesn't affect your desire to be a varsity roommate, and doesn't seem to affect your choice of major. Right? Those are kind of like the headline results. Let's see, what's the other thing? The other thing that we can look at too is if you look at go down to HS academic score. So this is like the academic score of the high school academic score of yourself. So what we see is that a higher academic score for yourself is related to a higher GPA. So people who come in like having more preparation on average tend to do better too. Okay, good. So, and then we just have like a lot of different controls, like whether your roommate is black, like, and other controls about you too. But the main effects are these things are up here too. Are there any questions on how we interpreted this table? Because that's the main table. All right, good. Okay, yeah, we did really good when we did that. Okay, so let's see, we're gonna do that. Yeah, and in table 3B, effectively what they do is they just restrict the sample to, they restrict it to roommate pairs where there's 2 roommates. Because the basic model like assumes is 2 roommate setup. And what they show is that even in these rooms where there are just 2 roommates, the results look pretty much the same. Like roommates, like pair GPA is going to be positively influenced by roommate, fraternity or sorority membership, same thing, graduation late had no effect, varsity athlete no effect too, right? And something like this is what's called like a robustness test. Why might you want to restrict it to rooms with just 2 roommates? Instead of like including the whole sample where you have a situation, rooms with 2 students. Why might you want to do that instead of like putting in all the rooms where there may be 3 students or 4 students or 5 students? Why would you want to do that?
What's the strategy?
Say it again.
What's the strategy?
Okay. One of the reasons why you might want to do that is because if you have like multiple roommates, the question is how do you determine the peer influence? What they did in this paper is they say, well, okay, we'll use the average GPA of your 2 roommates. But what if one of your roommates is like always hanging out with her girlfriend, with his girlfriend or her boyfriend or whatever the case may be, and they're never in the room? That person doesn't influence you at all. But then we're making this assumption that that person is influencing you equally as the roommate who actually is there. And so you always want to think about these ways to kind of stress test your results. Okay, good. Now, let's look at table 4. Okay, so what happens in table 4 is, so remember this this model here where we take the GPA, your roommate's GPA and put it into your equation for your GPA, and we figure out an equilibrium what your GPA is to take care of this endogeneity issue, to take care of the fact that both your GPA and your roommate's GPA are being determined at the same time. So in table 4, we're going to do that. We're going to use this model here, and we're going to use the coefficients from this model. Let me refresh your mind. So if you look on page, if you look on page 7, equation 4, so when you do all this best response stuff, then what you realize is that the coefficients from equation 1, like the alpha and the gamma and the betas, they're going to be, if you just ran the naive regression in table 1, like the coefficients on the ability and the GPA will be very different than if you actually solve for the best response functions, where you're going to get the coefficients being like a combination of those coefficients, right? And so in the structural model, what they're going to do in table 4 is they're going to actually like do it from the perspective of the best response functions and use equation 4. Is everybody with me on that? Because this is an important distinction. Okay, good. All right. And so what they do is when they run the structural model, they find that, again, the result of your roommate, so roommate having a higher GPA also leads to you having a higher GPA, even when we take into account this endogeneity issue here in an explicit way. But it's not significant here, right? And what they do next is then they use instruments. So let's go to page, okay, page at the bottom of page 19. Can somebody just read that last paragraph at the bottom of page 19, please?
Bottom 19. Okay. Columns 2 and 3 of table 4 run two-stage least squares using a different set of assumptions. Here, I assume that roommate background only affects own GPA indirectly. Hence, the randomly assigned background characteristics can be used as instruments for roommate GPA. Using roommate academic index and SAT scores as an instrument in column 2, I find that the coefficient on roommate GPA falls to 0.04. And I include all possible roommate background characteristics as instruments: add family income, high school GPA, intent to study, intent to achieve honors, parents' education. I find that the instrumental variable coefficient rises to 0.28 and has a t-stat of 2.3.
Exactly. So let me explain what's happening here. And we'll end on this note, because if you get these points, like all of the other things are going to be really auxiliary. But this is really important. So we start off with this relationship here. And what we observed is that, so the random assignment takes care of the fact that the unobserved characteristics are not going to be correlated with any of these things here, which we showed, like the SAT scores were not correlated. The SAT scores, your roommate's SAT scores were not correlated with your SAT scores, right? So that the random assignment takes care of that part. Now, this GPA is still being determined. Your roommate's GPA and your GPA is still being determined simultaneously. And one way we did it was we said, let's use best response functions, and then we